Welcome everyone to LCDC Issues. This is our one of our speaker series events. Thank you to Jan Cranston, who does a great job running these things. And today we've got a really good one, I think it's going to be. We've got three guests from Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, which is a statewide citizens organization dedicated to educating the public about alternatives to the death penalty. We have a little bit of a structure to this meeting. Normally, if you've been to one of these before, we have a break in the middle of it. Because it's on Zoom, we're not doing a break. We're muting everyone at the top of the meeting and asking you to save your questions till the end of the speaker bit. We're going to have three speakers, and it's going to take about a little over a half hour. And then we're going to go to Q&A. So if you would put your questions into the chat, that would be very much appreciated. We expect it to take a little over a half hour, and once we get into Q&A, we can go until 9 o'clock. So it's about an hour and a half if we need it, but we'll sort of stop when we run out of questions. The issue of the death penalty is particularly timely, given that my name's Chris. I'm the chair of the Issues Committee. Thank you for being here. The issue of the death penalty is particularly timely given that the federal government resumed executions just this week and executed someone named Daniel Lewis Lee in Indiana. First, we'll hear from a loved one of two murder victims. Next, we'll learn that there are many reasons to oppose the death penalty. And finally, we'll hear about VADP's abolition strategy for 2021 and how we can support that. We're going to be recording the talk so that we can go back to it later if we need to, or for anyone that couldn't make it today. That's kind of why we're saving the questions for the end. So again, if you have any questions as we go along, please write them into the chat. The first speaker we welcome this evening is Linnell Patterson. Linnell became involved in the fight against the death penalty in late 2001 after her father and stepmother were murdered by her stepbrother and some of his acquaintances. She and her sister opposed capital punishment for the perpetrators of this heinous crime. To them, death does not equal justice and does not promote healing, nor will it honor the ones they lost. Since then, Linnell has spoken against capital punishment in legislatures and at events to support abolition of the death penalty. She's a family nurse practitioner and lives with her husband in Harrison. Welcome, Linnell.
She's muted.
Linnell,
we got it.
There you go.
Hi, thank you for having me. I like to start out by just saying that my dad was awesome. He was an engineer. He taught me math. He played the guitar. He took us camping. He married my stepmom, Lucy, when I was a teenager. And she was an elementary school principal. They flirted. She had a beautiful smile. She was great. When I learned that they were murdered, I was 19 years old. and I was told by my mom, who actually had learned about the murders by watching TV. So she contacted the police. And then kind of throughout the next week, we got a lot of the information about the murders by reading the newspapers. So the first day we learned that they had been shot. The second day we learned that there was a chase and duct tape. One day we learned that they were actually tortured for hours with knives. They were ultimately both shot, and neither of them died from that. They were both ultimately suffocated to death. So the two main players, there were actually multiple people who were charged with crimes related to that murder. But the two main players were my stepbrother, Michael, and one of his friends, Landon May. And they were actually Landon May was my age. He was 19 at the time. And my stepbrother was just a little bit younger. He was 17 at the time. So there were three kind of main layers in those first few years that kind of established me being against the death penalty. And I think forgive me, I speak for my sister a lot in this. We have traveled this road together. and we have fought against the death penalty together. So in the trials, one of the first things that happened was we met the prosecuting attorney, who kind of sat us down and he asked us how we felt about the death penalty. And he was a very compelling person to us. Like, he was very quick. He was clearly very smart. He felt in control of the situation. And he asked us how we felt. And my sister and I didn't feel great about it initially. Like, something about it didn't align with us kind of at the outright. And when we shared that, he made it very, very clear that regardless of how we felt, he was going to pursue it. And I think that in the beginning of that conversation, being asked made it felt like it mattered. It made it felt like we had some element of control in the situation where we didn't have any control. It was by far the most overwhelming experience of my life. And then kind of what proceeded to happen in the trials was there was this language that was constant, and it was that justice was being sought for us. So it was we need to seek justice for the families. We are doing this for the families. The families need peace. They need this. And it at the outright made it feel like we were pawns. Because even though we didn't want this punishment, it was clearly being sought for us. So that was kind of the first layer. What my sister and I ended up doing with this is we ended up actually talking to the defense attorney. Let me back up. I don't think I was clear. My stepbrother, he pleaded guilty to all of his charges. So he was thrown into life in prison without the possibility of parole, okay? Landon May did not. He was also charged with sexual deviance, and he pled not guilty to sexual deviance. So he was kind of put into this trial by jury. So this is Landon May's trial. So we talked to the defense attorney. We started feeling even more kind of out of control. We talked to the prosecuting attorney. We started feeling more out of control. And then we met with the defense attorney and we said, hey, we don't know if this information means anything to you, but we are against the death penalty. And so what the defense attorney said was, in the punishment phase of the trial, one of his jobs is to kind of create a list of what is called mitigating circumstances. So in the punishment phase, there are aggravating circumstances and mitigating circumstances. And things like aggravating circumstances are like, he was over the age of 18, so he was considered an adult. That's an aggravating circumstance. He didn't know your family, so he had no kind of personal connection. He didn't have a kind of compelling reason to be aggressive against them. That's an aggravating circumstance. He said to us, if he says, I'm sorry, that would be in that mitigating circumstance. That would be a kind of a pro for him. And he talked to us, he said, if you talk to Landon and he says, I'm sorry, there's a chance that you could testify, and that could be a mitigating circumstance. So my sister and I kind of thought about this, and we decided to do it. And when we sat down to meet with Landon, it was very, very scary, because what I knew of him was from the trials and from the newspapers. And the trials and the newspapers made this person sound like the scariest, biggest monster in the world. And he was. I mean, he was literally like the monster of my nightmares, but he was portrayed as this evil character. And when we sat down to meet with him, my sister and I, we were kind of behind this pane of kind of bulletproof glass. We went to the prison, and we were each given a phone. I was given one, my sister was given one, which meant that Landon had to be on these 2 phones. And to sit down across from this person immediately changed my perspective, because he was this kid who, he had acne and he couldn't make eye contact with us. He clearly had mental health issues. He did say, "I'm sorry," which, you know, we always have taken it with a grain of salt, because, you know, he was in the middle of a trial, and who knows if it was true or if it was self-helping. But I think my takeaway was that all of a sudden this character, this monster, this evil thing was all of a sudden this person. And it really gave me back a lot of kind of ownership and power. It made me a lot less afraid to kind of interact with this person in a face-to-face capacity. We were not allowed to testify. It was considered hearsay. So it didn't mean anything for the trials, but it did mean something to me. The third layer of this was kind of, we continued to go to these trials. And at some point on one of the breaks, this group of women came up to my sister and I and introduced themselves. And it turned out that they were Landon's family members. And up until this point, I had a lot of trouble connecting with people on a personal level, kind of surrounding this, because it was just impossible to ever express what I was experiencing. And all of a sudden, these women in front of me, who were like Landon's cousins and his aunts, they were broken in a very, very similar capacity. So they cried and they felt warm to me. We resonated on a heart level that is hard to describe. And it was obviously kind of the other side of the coin, but they were also going through this in a very, very real and scary way. And they expressed fear about their loved one being taken from them. And I remember when the death sentence was read aloud, I can viscerally recall the noise that came from that row of women, because it felt like my noise. It felt like the noise that I made for my family. And it made it even more offensive to like think back through that trial and to hear those words that this is done for me and that this is done for my family and that this is what justice looks like. And I kind of talk about these things. It's not that I didn't experience these like depths of anger or wanting like my stepbrother and Landon really like hurt in prison. Like I traveled through that darkness. I can understand why people sometimes do want the death penalty, but I think the more I share about my own story is that like we're not allowed to make choices based on our emotions, right? So even being asked like how I feel about the death penalty, like number one, it's a lot to put on a 19-year-old girl, a 19-year-old anyone. But it's not a decision that you can make when you're feeling viscerally angry. That's literally how my dad and Lucy got murdered. So I think, you know, when you kind of say all these feelings are valid, then you're left to examine the system. And the system has failed us in a lot of ways. And I'm excited because I think Dale is going to kind of talk about the ins and outs of some of that next. But that is kind of the starter path of like how I became pretty active in being against the death penalty. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Linnell, for that perspective on the whole matter. That's powerful stuff. Next, we welcome Dale Brumfield to talk about the many reasons to oppose the death penalty. Dale is the field director for Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. He has written 10 books, including the Virginia State Penitentiary, A Notorious History. Dale organizes grassroots supports for death penalty reform and abolition and engages conservative, libertarian, and evangelical groups. He lives with his wife, Susan, in Doswell. Welcome, Dale.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you, Chris. Chris, your reaction to Linnell's story is typical. I have not heard anyone listen to Linnell's story and not be able to speak afterwards. So don't be embarrassed, or don't feel bad. It's a powerful story, and there's a lot of takeaways from Linnell's story. In particular is the power of the prosecutor in death cases. The prosecutor runs the show. They have the full resources of their jurisdiction, law enforcement, and their government behind them. And they can throw everything into one case if they choose to. We've seen it all over Virginia, most notably in a couple of select counties. Prince William, in particular, for years had a prosecutor who was hell-bent on pursuing death, and come hell or high water, he was going to pursue it, and nothing was going to stop him. The problem, though, is if they screw up, and prosecution misconduct is very real in capital cases. They are not disbarred, they are not punished. The worst thing that can happen to them is they get a new trial. So that is a real problem. Meanwhile, a defense attorney, most death penalty or capital cases are poor, indigent, or mentally ill, and they can't afford an attorney. And we've seen cases where attorneys are being paid, $1,500 or $2,000 to defend against the most difficult trial of their lives. And we've seen them fall asleep. We've seen them show up intoxicated. We've seen them use racial slurs against their own clients. They have no power. So the scale of justice is very slanted toward the prosecution in that case. And talking to Linnell and some other murder victim family members that I've spoken to, it's the same story. But a couple of other things too to think about. I'm hoping by the end of tonight, you'll have some tools that you can take with you to your elected representatives. And Michael will be talking after me about our strategy, our legislative strategy in 2021, where we were this year and where we hope to go next year. But a couple things, when I'm going around the state talking to groups, and I've talked to all kinds of groups, all political spectrum, religious service, civic groups, it doesn't matter. What I found is to support the death penalty, support it out of emotion, and they support it in theory. The theory is that they believe that it's racially equitable. They believe that it's a cost-effective form of deterrence. They believe that because of today's law enforcement techniques like DNA and things like that, that innocent people cannot get caught up in it anymore. The problem is all those things are false. Every one of them are false. The death penalty is not a cost-effective form of deterrence. In fact, it is probably the most costly program within the criminal justice system there is. Specific dollar amounts for Virginia are not available, but we know, looking at other states such as Kansas, that it costs anywhere from 3 to 7 times more money to put someone in, to pursue a death sentence against someone than to put them in prison for the rest of their lives. Why is that? Nobody can believe that. Why is it? Because the prosecution, there has to be 2 trials. It has mandated 2 trials in capital cases, a guilt or innocence trial, and then a sentencing trial. Those trials eat up enormous amounts of resources, and the prosecution has all the resources of the jurisdiction to throw into those things. So that is why they take so long. That doesn't even count the appellate process. They estimate that 70% of the cost of pursuing a death sentence is incurred at the trial level. and only 30% in the appellate level after that. So there's front-loaded. All these costs are front-loaded. Think of what could be done with all that money. Instead of pursuing death against one person, what if we applied that money toward criminal justice, proactive criminal justice programs that we know work? Things like substance abuse programs, or mental health programs, or domestic violence programs. Those things are proactive. The death penalty is reactive. But if we work before the crime to do these things, and states who have done these things have proven that they actually work. So that money could be put to a lot better use. Is the death penalty a deterrent? Well, the 2012 National Research Council concluded that there's no credible evidence that the death penalty deters crime. In fact, the highest murder rates in the country are in states that have the death penalty. That should tell you a whole lot right there. It's not a deterrent. Capital crimes are most always crimes of passion, or done by someone who is mentally ill, or someone who can't tell right from wrong, fantasy from reality. So there's no deterrent effect there. No one stops before they commit a capital crime and wonders or Google searches if they're in a capital crime state. Okay, that just doesn't happen, or a death penalty state. That doesn't happen. Racial equity, that is what the BLM movement has shown more light on racial equity, and nowhere is in criminal justice are there more racial disparities than in the death penalty. What we have found, there are two areas where racial equity is a problem. One is the race of the perpetrator. We have found that in Virginia and in most states, if you are Black, you are anywhere from 4 to 7 times more likely to get a death sentence than if you're white. The same is the race of the victim matters. If you're a victim, if a white victim has a 3 times more likelihood that the person will seek death against that person than if the victim is Black. This right there devalues Black lives, because it just doesn't put the same emphasis on them. Here in Virginia, some recent research that I did for an op-ed, I discovered that Virginia did not execute a white person for killing a Black person until 1997. And only 3 more since then. So these racial disparities are horrible. And this is a legacy that's got to end. You know, the death penalty, it may have been born in times of Virginia, but the Jim Crow era put it on steroids, and we're still carrying that legacy forward. And these racial inequities are still present. And in prison right now, Blacks make up about 13% of our population, but 42% of our prisons are composed of African Americans. So there's this, and the federal system, 44% are African American. So the racial, it's skewed horribly. And this is just indicative of what we're seeing, what has grown the Black Lives Matter the most. The other thing is, are innocent people ever caught up in the death penalty? Many people think that no one's ever innocent. Sometimes when I talk to groups, especially those on the opposite end of the political spectrum than the group we're speaking to tonight, they say that, well, you know, no one who's ever been executed in Virginia has been proven to have been innocent after they were executed. I said, yeah, there's really 2 reasons. The first reason is Virginia has a 21-day rule, which says that once you are sentenced to death, your attorney has 21 days and only 21 days to introduce any potentially exonerated evidence on your behalf. On day 22, bets are off. No more new evidence. So that's one big problem. The second big problem is, once someone in Virginia is executed, all the evidence in the case is incinerated. It's destroyed. So there's no evidence to go back and look at. And no one has the resources or the time to go back and re-look at an execution that's already occurred, because it's not going to bring that person back. Okay, we can, one of our slogans of our organization is we can release them from prison, but we can't release them from the grave. Once they're dead, they're dead. So we make mistakes. We're human beings. Any attorney who works in our criminal justice system will say that mistakes are made all the time, but when it comes to life or death, those mistakes are irreversible. So they must be stopped. So I've about reached my time. We're saving questions for the end. So yes, we'll have you some tools. We'll have a call to action for you and let you know what you can do to contact your representative to move forward to death penalty abolition in 2021. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Dale. Like Dale mentioned, for anyone that got on the call a little bit late, we're saving questions to the end, just kind of because we figured we'd record the talk and make it available later. So if you've got any questions, please just drop them in the chat, and we'll get to them as soon as we're done with the speaker part. We're going to hear from Michael Stone about the legislative backdrop and abolition strategy for 2021. Michael has served as executive director for Virginia for Alternatives to the Death Penalty since 2015. Prior to this position, he worked as a field organizer for the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. Michael also worked for 25 years in social ministry for the Office of Justice and Peace at the Catholic Diocese of Richmond. He lives in Richmond with his wife and is a proud father of 2 adult sons. Welcome, Michael.
It's great to be with you all. Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Great to be with you all tonight. Thanks for having us. Our organization is nearly 30 years old. We have for years been trying to figure out ways to ameliorate the reach of the death penalty and to slowly build support for abolition. When I was hired in 2015, VADP as an organization was basically an organization made up of religious, progressives, and civil rights people. And because of my background working in the Catholic Church, I had done a lot of work on pro-life issues and had a lot of relationships with Republicans. And so one of my first goals was trying to diversify the organization politically, because we felt that we would never win in Virginia unless we were able to have it truly bipartisan. And so I slowly tried to diversify the organization with some limited success. One of our board members is on this call tonight, Nick Cody, who's a very active libertarian in Northern Virginia. Another board member is Chris Brownlick, who ran for state senate as a Republican, was an appointee of a Republican governor on the State Board of Education, and runs the Thomas Jefferson Institute, which is sort of a conservative public policy think tank for the Commonwealth. And both Nick and Chris have been tremendous assets to the organization and has really helped us deepen our reach within those respective political communities. But through fundraising, getting Dale on board just about 3 years ago, he really has stepped that up. So we felt that by the 2020 legislative session, we had enough support across the political spectrum that we could really begin a legislative debate about abolition. For the prior 5 years, we'd been working on a bill to exempt people with severe mental illness from the death penalty. And we were able to get some traction with that issue in the state Senate. So much so that in 2019, we were able to get it out of committee and pass it by a 23-17 margin. And then when it came up in the 2020 session, we won again, this time by a 32-7 margin, including 11 of the 19 Republicans in the Senate voting for that measure. And one Senator, Bill Stanley, declared his support for death penalty abolition and challenged his fellow Republicans to rethink their positions on capital punishment. So we had a bit of a breakthrough there. He became the first current member of the General Assembly to declare publicly his opposition. Privately, we've had concerns expressed by Republicans for years. We were hoping to get an abolition bill debated in the House and Senate. Unfortunately, given how crazy this past session was and the focus on issues like gun control, equal rights amendment, LGBTQ issues, and others, that they felt that they had to delay that and other criminal justice reform matters till the next session. So we never were able to get the debate we were hoping for. That being said, our Senate patron, Senator Scott Suravel, is convinced we have the votes both in the Judiciary Committee and on the floor to pass the bill. It'll be a razor close margin in Judiciary, but we think we have a couple vote margin on the floor, and if Senator Stanley is able to carry a couple of other Republicans with him, then we should have a comfortable win on the floor. The House is a different question, different matter. Because we have not had the severe mental illness issue to discuss with folks in the House, we've had a hard time gauging where a lot of legislators are on that in that chamber. The leadership of the Courts of Justice Committee just made it very difficult for us to even have hearings on that issue. So where we are right now is that we are cautiously optimistic that we have the votes to get it out of Courts of Justice, but we really have no idea where 60 to 80 members of the House of Delegates are on the death penalty, because unless they serve on Courts of Justice, they've never had to really deal with the issue except perhaps a vote on execution method. But we found from experience in other states, just because you might vote for a particular execution method doesn't mean that you would not vote to end the death penalty. So Dale, myself, and our lobbyist, Virginia Podboy, who's also on this call, have been meeting with legislators via conference call and Zoom. And so far we've met with nearly 10, a couple senators and about 6 or 7 members of the House of Delegates. And as a matter of fact, earlier today, we had our first Republican member of the House of Delegates tell us straight up that she was opposed to the death penalty, would vote to abolish, and gave us the names of several Republicans she thought felt the same way, and even said she might be even able to co-patron the bill in the House. So that was a real nice breakthrough that we had earlier today. We know that 90% or so of Democrats are with us already. On the Senate side, unfortunately, 2 Northern Virginia senators, Chap Peterson and Dick Saslaw, have made it abundantly clear they would not vote for abolition. So Dale's work is focusing on the districts of several moderate Democrats that we want to shore them up to make sure we can get their vote next year. And as I said, we're doing these individual meetings with as many members of the House of Delegates as possible to get a better vote count on where we think we are on the House of Delegates. So I think that is the major thing we're talking about at this point. We are shopping for a patron in the House of Delegates. Delegate Lee Carter, patron in Abolition bill last session. But to be honest, he was not particularly effective. And ideally, we want someone who serves on Courts of Justice and who is an attorney to be able to carry this bill. So we're going to be speaking with a few members of the Black Legislative Caucus, as well as a few other members of courts in an effort to get someone to be the chief patron of the bill. We certainly welcome Delegate Carter's support, but we really feel it's important to have a lawyer and a member of that committee be the chief patron in the coming session if we're going to win. I think that is all I had to say about strategy. Virginia, we could, if you can unmute Virginia Podboy, she may have a comment or two before we get to the questions.
I think that sums it up pretty nicely. I'd be curious what the specific questions are, because then maybe depending on the interest of the group, we can dive into some more specifics if we're able. So, yeah.
All right. Well, whoever's going to moderate the questions, I'll hand it over to them.
That would be me. If you got some questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Actually, Tyler, could we just sort of unmute everyone? I guess we can't really do that.
Everybody.
I just asked for everyone to unmute themselves. So if everyone could unmute themselves, that would be great.
Yeah, we don't really have so many people here that we can't just like have a conversation for Q&A. I was kind of curious about whether or not y'all figure that like if someone has a demonstrated lack of empathy, that could be considered a mental disorder, couldn't it? That would like if someone like just straight up doesn't have that part of, you know, the thought process that has where empathy comes from, and ends up being a fairly cruel person, just, you know, because of that. Does that seem like grounds for you know, not having death penalty based on a mental disorder?
Well, right now, under current law, that there is no impediment to executing someone with mental illness.
Yeah.
You can be diagnosed with any disorder and still be executed. The only bar is, do you understand causality, that what you once did means that you're being executed? And if a judge finds that you don't understand causality, you can be forcibly treated until you are, and then you'll be executed. So the bill that has been introduced for the last few years has a pretty narrow definition, technical definition of what severe mental illness means. And maybe I'll turn it over to someone who actually knows what they're talking about, Virginia, about that definition in the bill.
So it's a great question. And I think what you're referring to is, would like a psychopath or someone with that kind of DSM definition qualify under our bill? And I would say no. So there are actually two bills from last session. Senator Favola had a version, Delegate Jay Leftwich had a different version, and then Delegate Patrick Hope had a version that was similar to Senator Favola. So I would definitely encourage everyone to kind of do a quick search on the LIS for the those bills, but it's a very, very, very narrow definition. The other thing that we are really cognizant of is voluntary intoxication, either by drugs or alcohol, is also not a permissible severe mental illness under this. And that's something that is also very significant in Virginia criminal law. We don't have a defense for voluntary intoxication, and it's a pretty high bar to meet in voluntary intoxication. So really, we tried to strategically not put as many as little kind of definition in it as possible. So as few specifics as possible in our definition, as I guess the better way to term it, but you'd have to be in an active hallucinatory state or delusions. This would have to be documented. And really these are situations where, and this comes up all the time in capital trials. I can think of a capital trial a few years ago in Dinwiddie where the Commonwealth attorney's expert witness and the defense's expert witness both agreed that this gentleman was in an active psychotic state when this murder of a state trooper was committed. And he was found a couple miles away from the site, which was on I-85, and was like naked and like had gone in a car and was kind of actively just saying a bunch of things about how God made him do it and all these things. So there has to be that kind of documented thing. So most of the time we're talking about cases where both experts for each side in this trial would agree that this was happening. So, and that's one of the things, I mean, that was a strategic thing when we were putting forward with this bill, is if both the prosecution and the defense experts are saying this is happening, then, and that's a really good question that your Commonwealth Attorney in Loudoun just asked. So it's the difference between, and it's a really good question because we kind of modeled this after the Supreme Court decision she's referencing, because it doesn't, severe mental illness is different from mentally ill or super low IQ. So it would be possible to have an IQ that was an appropriate level and meet our, meet our definition of mental illness, but we kind of tracked that reasoning because it's really the level of culpability and what their understanding is of the act that they're committing at the time they're committing it. And for the same reasons that if you were intellectually disabled, which I believe is the new term under the Virginia Code, but not in that particular Supreme Court decision. So if you did meet, so if you were intellectually disabled, you could, the thinking is, and the reasoning and the rationale in that decision is that you don't understand what act you're committing. And severe mental illness would be the same, that you aren't in a conscious state where you're actually appreciating what you're committing. Without, and the other reason this is significant because we also kind of get into the not guilty by reason of insanity, which is exceptionally high bar to meet in Virginia under Virginia law. So severe mental illness tracks defendants that really are in this act. I think the active psychotic state is kind of an important descriptor in the definition. So I would definitely encourage you to look up. It's hard to talk in total specifics because there's two different bills that kind of do say slightly different things, especially in the significant part of the definition, but that's the crux of it. And it tracks the reasoning for, frankly, for why we don't execute juveniles under Atkins v. Virginia, and exempting those that are intellectually disabled from execution as well. It's the same level of reasoning and rationale.
Yeah, let me just jump in at this point, and that in a sense that bill would affect a relatively few number of people, and that the purpose of the bill from our perspective was more as an educational tool, as a way to open up the issue of the death penalty with legislators. And for several years, we had that opportunity on the Senate side, at least. And we were able to do a lot of education of folks on both sides of the aisle on that, on the death penalty in general and mental illness in particular. And we would love to have the bill pass, but for the 2021 session, we really are focusing, we're going to probably be introducing both bills, but our major focus is going to be on abolition, because for a number of reasons that we think the timing is right. We have a governor who has said he would sign an abolition bill. The mood of the country is right, with the strong focus around criminal justice reform, especially around issues of race in criminal justice, that we're going to be going all out, and that the severe mental illness exemption would be a fallback option if we are not able to win in 2021. But it's curious that there's plenty of support in the Senate for that exemption. We're not sure we have the votes in the House, even though we think we have the vote in the committee, even though in that same committee we think we do have the votes for abolition. It's kind of curious the way viewpoints are on the committees in each chamber. They don't necessarily reflect each other. Yeah, so like I say, our focus is very much going to be on abolition moving ahead.
Can you talk about what kind of statements the various religions have made regarding the death penalty, and how many of them are at all supportive of it?
Interesting question. Because I worked in the religious world for so many years, I'll handle that one. All major Christian denominations oppose the death penalty with one exception, and actually two exceptions: Southern Baptists and I think one branch of the Lutherans. And among evangelicals, the National Association of Evangelicals used to support the death penalty, but a few years ago, they changed their position to neutral on the issue. Because they recognized that there was a biblical case to be made both for and against. So the vast majority of religious denominations within the United States oppose the death penalty, including all branches of Judaism. I don't know enough about the non-Abrahamic faiths. Within the Islamic community, I think there are differences of opinion as far as I can tell, though the emphasis within the Quran, as I understand it, is very much focused on victim family members and essentially giving the victim family members the final say over whether the death penalty should be carried out or not, which is very different than our US context. And one of the things I just wanted to mention about Linnell's conversation earlier, her testimony, is that victim family members are explicitly forbidden under US law from saying one way or another whether they support the death penalty. So Linnell and her sister were in a position where the prosecutor repeatedly misrepresented them and their feelings at trial, and yet they were unable to contradict that even in the penalty phase of the trial. And it really is one of the things that the murder victim families that have been really very frustrated by with our system.
We have a couple questions in the chat. Did y'all see Tyler's question? One measure I personally would like to see is a 20 to 25 year prison limit as an organization that supports alternatives to the death penalty. Is this a feasible alternative specifically in the US?
Well, I can't necessarily speak for other states or for the federal law for that matter, but in Virginia, if you are found guilty of capital murder, there are only two possible punishments, death or life in prison without the possibility of parole. Under the abolition bills that were submitted in this last session, it's my understanding that if you're found guilty of capital murder, there would only then be one punishment, life in prison without parole. So that's where the current code is. I think at this point in time, trying to bring the maximum sentence down to 20 or 25 years is not feasible within Virginia. It might be in some other states, but not here. And again, you know, unless Virginia thinks otherwise, I think that's maybe an issue 5 or 10 years down the road. But I think in a sense, it's going to be difficult to make our system less harsh as long as we still allow death as a punishment. It's hard to imagine us getting very far in terms of genuine reforms as long as the death penalty is on the table.
I would agree with that. I would also say, so just the way Virginia criminal law is, and you know, we're focused right now on the death penalty, and we're a pretty discreet organization in that regard. So we're trying to, I mean, whatever the alternative is to save lives, that's where we are. I mean, obviously, like the incarceration would be the alternative that we promote, I guess, if we promote anything. But I will say this, Michael's right, like we need to eliminate the extreme so that then we could work back. But there are quite a few offenses in the Virginia Code that involve a mandatory life sentence upon conviction. So all of that would have to be looked at kind of issue by issue. And what our classes of felonies and the range of punishment that is allowed within those. I will also say this: Virginia, when they eliminated parole, they called it truth in sentencing, and they put in sentencing guidelines. So every time someone is convicted of a felony, before the punishment phase is imposed, there's kind of a break, a continuance, so that what's called a pre-sentence report can be run, where they look at a variety of factors, mitigating evidence, the defendant's criminal record, the circumstances in this crime, the likelihood they'll reoffend, all of these things, and it kind of is put in a mechanical formula and then spits out what the range of punishment is going to be. And judges are really supposed to impose something within the range of punishment. If they do what's called deviate, they have to document why they're doing an upward or a downward deviation on that. So that's kind of a really short kind of thing to say that we're a little bit of a ways away from a 20 to 25 year prison limit, I think, in Virginia, given the number of offenses that have mandatory life, and then kind of given the way our sentencing guidelines work. And I'm not that familiar with, I'm barred in Massachusetts, which does it slightly different than Virginia, but I'm not barred in other states beyond that, where there's that kind of hard year limit on something like a murder or something like that. So we have a ways to go to walk that back, I would say.
I think reading that question to me actually made my heart pound a little. I think what is compelling about thinking about that is that I think there is a lot that can be done to start in that direction, that starts with like mental health services within the prison system that are not currently there. So I do think that there is a lot of work that can be done like as a baseline. I think what is interesting to me in all of these debates is how much common ground we all actually have. So even when like that doesn't look comfortable to me in any capacity, there is a lot about that goal that I could potentially get behind as a victim. So yeah, that was what struck me about that one.
Hey there, I'm Jennifer Boisko. I serve in the Senate. I'm on the Judiciary Committee. And one of the things that we're looking at currently, the way the law is written, when we present a bill, we have a fiscal impact that is included with it. The law says we can only look at what the cost would be of whatever the proposal is, which means that we don't currently have the ability to look at where we could make savings. One of the initiatives that we're going to be taking up in this special session is changing that law so that we can look at the costs and the benefits. And I think those people who say, like when abolition of the death penalty comes up, or paroling someone or letting them out of prison comes up, that the discussion goes immediately to the cost of the additional officers that are going to have to come on board. We're going to change that, or we're going to make every effort to change that in the upcoming special session, which perhaps we'll be able to have a different conversation. And then we can talk about the benefits of the therapies and other sorts of trainings while someone's incarcerated to help them be ready to get out of prison at some point. But I just thought that was an important piece that that sometimes is overlooked and not even realized by just folks who are fighting for something. So thanks again for having this meeting. I think it's really an important conversation. Appreciate all the speakers.
Sure.
We appreciate you being here, Senator Boisko, and I think that's a really interesting point to bring up in the Virginia conversation, because you don't hear us as death penalty advocates discuss the fiscal impact a whole bunch. And the primary reason for that historically is that one of the largest expenditures on the death penalty is the regional capital defenders offices, which is really the reason we credit that over the last 10 years we have had such a decline in death sentences, and really just having the fair fight in court. We have expert attorneys that their sole focus is doing capital murder trials, and that costs the state money. It's important money. And then other parts of the death penalty are really kind of hidden within the various agencies, Department of Corrections, the Judiciary, Attorney General's, I mean, you name it, they're hidden costs. And so it's hard for us to highlight that without highlighting some of the things that are problems. But when we look at abolition, we can say right away that if we eliminate the capital defenders offices because they're no longer needed, that's a tremendous cost savings, just that one line item to the Commonwealth. So I think Senator Boisko's point is a really good one, and I'm very hope that will be a very helpful mechanism to highlight just some of the positives. We know it's more expensive. I mean, just the number of trials, the appeals, the expert attorneys, all of those things cost the state a tremendous amount of money, both on the prosecution and defense side of a capital trial, housing them for on average 7 years, the execution, all of those things are tremendously expensive. And we know in other states that typically a capital trial is 3 to 5 times more expensive than just a life in prison without parole or a kind of life case for first-degree murder. So we just are never able to highlight it very effectively in Virginia because it's such a hidden cost. So so that is an excellent point, and I really, really hope that gets done in special session. I appreciate you letting us know about that.
Yeah, just let me chime in on one thing, and that's something that neither Dale and I talked about earlier, is that because of the phenomenal job of the attorneys in the regional capital representation centers, that no one has been sentenced to death since 2011 in Virginia. And that death sentence was overturned by the courts, I think, 1.5 years ago. There are only 2 people left on death row. Both of those cases had serious trial errors that the Fourth Circuit remanded to district court for additional hearings. In one case, there was a witness statement that blew apart the entire theory of the prosecution, which was a circumstantial case, was never given to the defense. We're hopeful that not only the death sentence, but the entire conviction will be overturned. And in the other case, there was a juror who committed perjury during the selection process in order to get on the jury, that he was related to someone in law enforcement when that should have excluded him from the jury pool. So we're hoping at least the death sentence will be overturned in that case. So it's entirely possible in the next few months we'll have an empty death row in Virginia. And by early next year, it will be 10 years until the last person was sentenced to death.
One thing to remember about Virginia, don't forget that eliminating the death penalty is going to be very symbolic for the rest of the South too. Because Virginia, we have executed 1,390 people since 1608. That's more than Texas. Okay, that's more than everybody. We're the top death penalty state in the entire country. So to eliminate it in Virginia is not just have tangible benefits, but it's a very symbolic benefit as well. We're hoping it'll be a trickle-down effect to the other southern states who have it. They say if Virginia can do it, we can do it too. So it's very important.
Get a question from Jan, which was, can you tell us how a federal convict is affected by the laws in the state where they are convicted?
Yeah, it's my understanding that essentially the state law really has no impact if someone is going to trial under a federal crime. For example, the Boston bombing case, Massachusetts had abolished the death penalty in the 70s, and yet the federal government still was able to prosecute, convict, and sentence to death the one surviving person who carried out the bombing that exacted such a horrific toll in Boston, and that there have been federal death penalty prosecutions in other abolition states like Michigan and Rhode Island in recent years. So state law is really no bar. I don't know, Virginia, if there's any particular aspect of that you might want to weigh in on.
So it's significant who ends up charging. So like in the Massachusetts case, I mean, he could have been charged under state law, certainly because he committed an act of terrorism in Virginia is one of the punishable capital offenses. So certainly he could have been prosecuted by the state, but the federal government elected to prosecute him on that charge. So that's a significant, like, who elects to do that? And typically states, if the feds want to get involved, will defer to the federal government, and then say there's something that isn't prosecuted that's also state offense, they could also go to state court to impose punishment there. So it's significant who ultimately takes the death penalty. And so the strategy, I mean, you know, this is your clue into the national strategy to abolish the death penalty. I mean, we want to go after the federal death penalty system, but the best way to do that is to go state by state by state and abolish the death penalty at the state level to show that there's no appetite nationwide to do this. But while we still have a swath of death penalty states that utilize the death penalty, it's a less compelling argument on the federal level. And also before the Trump administration, frankly, there was not a whole lot of activity going on functionally with executions at the federal level. That has changed, obviously, and is a lot more of an immediate concern. But that's truly the strategy, is we need to kind of go state by state. Virginia will, as Dale said, will be a significant member of the abolition group when we're able to do this. And I think it will be, let's just say all eyes nationally are on what we can accomplish in Virginia. So this is a significant time period, because I think if Virginia goes, then there's a compelling case for a lot of the southern states to move towards abolition.
And there are a number of other states firmly in the Republican column that are close to abolition. Wyoming in particular is very, very close. In this last session, 25% of the entire legislature, which is overwhelmingly Republican, co-sponsored abolition bills. But under the rules of the legislature, they weren't able to bring it to the floor. So hopefully next year might be the year for Wyoming to abolish, and hopefully for Virginia as well. Utah is not far away, and there are significant abolition efforts underway in Kentucky and Tennessee as well.
Any more questions?
Yeah, what can we do as individuals to help promote abolition?
Yeah, that was.
Call your state senator, call your state delegate, and let them know that the death penalty is an important issue to you, and that urge them to vote for abolition in the 2021 session. That is the single most important thing you can do personally. And if you want to do even more than that, talk to your friends, talk to your relatives, talk to your work colleagues, talk to your professional association, talk to your neighborhood association about this issue. Dale would be happy to give a presentation either hopefully if we are able to resume in-person meetings, and if not, VADP has a Zoom account. We can host virtual sessions for any organization anywhere in the Commonwealth. And we would be happy to put together a panel like this tonight to speak to your group. Yeah. And if you have any specific questions, if somebody raises a question with you about this issue that you don't feel comfortable answering, contact Dale or contact myself, and we'll be happy to get you some resources and a good answer to that question. But essentially the only outstanding argument in support of the death penalty for which there's no answer is retribution, that the SOBs deserve to die. If somebody is in that place, there's not a lot you can do about it. The best you can do is agree to disagree. But if the reasoning is for any other factor, there are good counter arguments.
No argument cannot be countered. I was a vendor at CPAC 2 years in a row. And you talk about a tough crowd. I mean, these are diehard Republicans. What I will tell you about CPAC is young Republicans were universally with us. They want to see the death penalty abolished. The older, hardline law and order Republicans we have the problem with. Now, a lot of them got up in my face. A lot of them wanted to try to beat me down, but they have no facts to back up how they feel. They just have that retribution angle, and they believe in the theory that it works, and we need to keep doing it. But facts don't back it up, and if you have your facts straight, and we can help you get your facts straight, and you'll send them home talking to themselves because they won't have any argument. So, just let us know. We're here for you. We'll help. Any group you have that you'd like me to come speak or set up a Zoom for, just let me know. And I'll help give you those tools to help counter those arguments and be able to saliently explain why you're against the death penalty and why abolition needs to occur.
Yeah, we have a front and back fact sheet about the 6 or 8 primary reasons why it's time for Virginia to end the death penalty. And Dale can maybe get that to the organizers of this, and maybe if there's a way you can distribute it on your website or Facebook page where people can download it, but we'd be happy to share that with you.
Also, join our network. As we near session, we'll have more and more specific asks, right down to contacting what specific legislators need to be contacted. You all are in a great position. I mean, the fact that Senator Boisko was able to join us and that your Commonwealth Attorney is on this call, I mean, that's a fantastic show of support from your elected leaders up here. If you have friends or family that are in other districts, encourage them to contact their delegate or senator. We're a small organization. We try to increase our reach tremendously. Dale is a huge part of how we're able to do that, but we've got a lot of new faces, especially in the House of Delegates, and we're trying to kind of gather as much intel as possible. So it's hard to understand from the outside, but the legislature deals with 2,000 bills in 30 to 45 days. Most of the people that serve us as legislators have never even considered the death penalty as an issue, and they're likely not on a committee that has ever dealt with this because there's only one committee in each body that deals with death penalty or criminal specific bills. So some individuals may not have even considered this. They might be a teacher, an educator, they might be a business person, that this is not an issue that they've really given much thought, and it's not really an election issue. So we're trying to gather how people feel, and so those conversations that you all can have with friends and family members of people that are in different districts are also tremendous for us. It's a huge impact when you let legislators know how you feel about things. That's a huge impact. So that can't be undervalued either at the state level or the federal level, frankly, on any of these significant issues coming up. And the more that we have these conversations, the more understanding will be that the tide has turned, that the fact that there haven't been any death sentences in Virginia in almost 10 years means that it's time for this to go away on paper. So you all can make a difference by just a phone call or an email or reaching out to friends or family that might be able to do the same and broaden even your reach. So, and we appreciate all those efforts, and joining our network will allow you to kind of get information and kind of understand what's going on with this particular issue kind of minute to minute. So especially during session, we put out a lot of action alerts and have a lot of specific asks depending on what's going on at the moment. So, and we appreciate all of that, and we appreciate being invited to this.
Very much.
Yeah. Just one quick story. Virginia is the one who's down at the GA, and every once in a while I will get a text during session saying, Senator X is squishy. And so I'll go into our database and we'll find that we may have 20, 40, or 100 supporters in that district. So I'll bang out an email to those constituents saying, we need you to make this phone call, give the number, and here's the sentence, Senator X, we need you to support Senate Bill or House Bill 123, and this is why. And usually what will happen a day or two later, Virginia will text me back saying, the senator, the delegate has said, call off the dogs, you've got my vote. So that's very, very important for us during session. as well as when a committee vote is coming up. You know, when you sign up on our website, we ask you to please give us your home address or at least your home zip code, because that way our database can match you with your elected official, so that when a vote comes before courts of justice in the House, we can send an email to just those people who reside in the district whose delegates serve on that committee, rather than to everyone. And so, yeah, so those are just a couple quick examples of why being on our database means you can get the information quickly and directly, rather than waiting several days through an intermediary, and maybe by then it'll be too late for the vote.
It's also important, even if you know that your senator or delegate is supportive of this, contact them anyway, because maybe that will get them to stand up or say something in committee or stand up on the floor because they see such an outpouring of support. So don't take for granted that they might agree. It's worth the contact, because we need everyone to be vocal supporters, not just supporters. So I also like to kind of highlight that.
The comment came up about the movie Just Mercy. Before the pandemic, that movie had a tremendous impact in the faith communities. I think from January to March, I spoke at about 12 different locations, most of them churches, because of the movie Just Mercy. Many churches actually were sending groups to the movie theater to watch this, and then they came back, they had questions, they called me, and I went and spoke to them about it. Yeah, push that movie. That movie was a great look at how the death penalty really works. And it takes place in Alabama or Mississippi, but it's pertinent to Virginia too. The same issues, the same problems, the mental illness, the possibilities of innocence, all these things are in this movie. So it's a great example of just how flawed and corrupted the death penalty system is. So yeah, highly recommended. If you're a member of a faith community who has seen the movie or wants to see it, come speak or do a Zoom session, you know, I'm more than happy to do it.
Yeah, I see just someone else made a comment about Netflix having it available for free. I know that it was free. I'm not sure if it still is. But if it is, or even if it isn't, organize a watch party with some friends or colleagues to watch it together, and then unpack it with one another. That can be a very powerful thing. And I know at least Catholic Mobilizing Network, I think, has a study guide for unpacking the movie. And there may be others out there, but I know Catholic Mobilizing Network has one. And we'd be happy to get that to you if you're interested.
And then a lot of people don't know that Brian Stevenson, the author of that and the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama, has created a beautiful museum that Michael has been able to go see about the history of lynching and really the direct connection between that horrible history and the history of the death penalty all across the South and other states. So log on to that. He is just a warrior, and that book is tremendous. The movie is equally powerful, and his continued work making that racial justice connection and really making it visual for people is tremendous. So definitely worth checking out as well.
Hey, do you guys mind if I drop, I guess it's for Dale and Michael, just because you're the two email addresses that I believe I have. You mind if I drop your email addresses in the chat for anyone that wants to reach out to you guys and try to set up?
Sure.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Are there any other questions before we wrap this up?
I would just like to say to Linnell, thank you again from all of us. We listened to you and tried to imagine what it was like to lose your loved ones and then to go through the trials and being so young. You're still young, so it can't have been that long ago. And it's just hard to imagine. And your thoughtful description of it all was really helpful to us, and we just really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, Linnell speaks to the heart. Dale and I can speak to the head, but Linnell is the one who tears open folks' hearts to make them be able to listen with their head. And the role of murder victim family members, the role of other what I call collateral damage from the death penalty, family members of those on death row, the executioners, the capital defense attorneys. So many people experience trauma. A few years ago, I was giving a talk in Northern Virginia, and a gentleman came up to me afterwards and said, "Thank you so much for your presentation." And he told me that he was on the jury for Zacharias Moussaoui, who was tried in federal court in Virginia for being a plotter of the 9/11 attack. And he talked about how disgusted he was by the way the prosecutors tried to emotionally manipulate the jury to try to force them to seek the death penalty. And he said he came into the trial as a death penalty supporter, but as a result of that experience, he became a passionate opponent to the death penalty. And he saved Zacharias Moussaoui's life. He and one other juror voted against death on one count, but he was the only one to vote against death on the second count. And he said he would have never had the courage to do that if it wasn't for just the grotesque lengths to which the prosecution went in that trial. So there are a lot of, and he talked about how he still has nightmares about that case years and years later.
It was an honor to be here. It's when I first got involved in the movement, I started meeting with other victims' family members, kind of who were against death penalty, and I met a lot of people who were pro death penalty as well. But the group that was against the death penalty had a real sense of peace that was incredibly drawing. So it's always an honor to be a part of things. Yeah, always. Thank you.
We love you, Linnell.
Yep.
It's mutual.
Awesome. This has been great. Unless anyone else has any further questions, I figure this is probably a good time to wrap up the meeting.